The topic is the restoration of the Scoodic or St. Croix River, and Kim Reeder knows a lot about that, having been on the Community Liaison Committee with NB Power for a while. Kim, welcome.
Thank you, Alan.
How long did you spend on the committee?
So far, it's actually quite new. It's been a couple of months. We've had a March meeting and we've had an April meeting. The meetings are about 5 weeks apart. So we've got another one coming up. I believe it's for the end of the month.
Now, certainly from the history of press releases and the current media coverage, it appears to me that this is essentially a done deal with the exception of environmental assessment and permits and all that administration, which is important administration. But in your view, is this a done deal?
I'm certainly crossing my fingers. I believe it is. I think it is not only I am one for community to be able to speak their mind, and I think as people we have the power. We just have to utilize it and choose to utilize it and become champions for ourselves. So I believe there's a will in the community to have this dam out. And instead of focusing on the dam, let's say to restore the river, really, instead. That's my focus. It's not really about a piece of concrete, it's about this river coming back in parts and pieces, and then hopefully holistically eventually. But so yeah, I really do believe that this is a done deal because the people that I've talked to, really want it to happen. And I think if we use our voices and use our minds, it'll happen.
Now, in terms of history and culture and significance for all members of the community, there is at least some talk that a building may remain or an interpretation center may be there or landscaping or what have you. Do you have a particular vision, or is that kind of premature?
I think it is a bit premature because there are as many ideas for what they might call a legacy project as there are people in the community. I must say, though, I'm really excited. One of the things I recently heard from a youth member of our community was that her concern wasn't with another monument. It was not even about an education center. It was about education. And I just thought, wow, what a forward thinker. I know myself, I've been involved in a lot of nonprofit organizations. I've been involved in a co-op projects and different things like that, where it's infrastructure. And what people don't realize a lot of the time is that there is maintenance with that infrastructure. There is taxes on infrastructure. So although, yes, I have definitely let my mind go there and think about what could be there. More significantly, I think we should think about the change it could affect in the community with education or with, there's a transmission station there, for instance, and I don't believe that's going anywhere. And they're, in my mind, horrific looking. However, some people can view them as industrial art. So there's so many different opinions that
This word infrastructure is the word of the moment these days. But as a former teacher, I wonder if you would agree. I'm a former teacher. Would you agree that infrastructure is often what's in the student's mind or in a computer these days or on a website? I mean, it doesn't have to be bricks and mortar.
Exactly right. Yeah, exactly right. And that's where I know a lot of my work is in climate change, and we're talking about, there is the built infrastructure, there is the natural infrastructure, your ecosystem, but you're right, there's this whole new virtual infrastructure, and education can be part of that.
Now, you were in these meetings, and naturally I wasn't, but I looked into some facts about dams in order to have an intelligent conversation with you, my end anyway, best I can. I didn't realize that dams have a finite life, that silt builds up behind them and then the silt doesn't go downstream to protect against storm surges, and that a lot of dams have been removed over North America, dozens I think. and that hundreds, if not thousands, may actually be dangerous a few miles up from a population center. What did the committee discuss in those topics?
Well, the committee hasn't had a lot of discussions about that, and really the purpose of the committee is for communication. So two ways. One, for MB Power to communicate through this forum to the community about where they are in the process. But then the second part is for the community to be able to express concerns. And what you're saying, that's actually not one that's come up, but it's very interesting because I actually do a lot of work in asset management. So what you're saying makes a lot of sense, that there is, all built infrastructure has a life expectancy. They're designed that way. They're designed to meet certain standards. And the other thing is not so much about the physical infrastructure. Like, that was a big conversation with Mac to Quack, right? The physical, the construction, things were deteriorating. That's not the topic of the day for Milltown. The topic of the day for Milltown is a different sort of value, okay? So it's the topic of the day for Milltown is financial value, energy value, community value. And you know what? Those three, it's not meeting any of them. You know,
Well,
it's not playing.
I mean, that's another thing, pardon me, my interrupting, but there were so many new things I learned. I mean, one is several of these turbines don't actually function. I've always thought of
Right.
run of the river as a reasonably clean source of electricity. I mean, there's no free lunch, as ecologist Barry Commoner said, but I've always had a good feeling about it, but several of these don't work at all. And I'm told that the amount of power that's generated could be generated with one windmill or some solar panels. Has the community discussed whether they're going to want to replace the power? I mean, they don't get their power from this particular generating station, but has there been any talk of replacing the power?
There was actually at our last meeting, there was a bit of that discussion. And I guess that conversation, you're right, it's not that, and that's what a lot of people don't quite comprehend, is that it's not like that power is being taken out of St. Stephen and we are going to be less power, right? It's more, it feeds into a grid. But the real question there, in my mind at least, is, you know, there's a certain part of MB Power's portfolio, and this is not something we've discussed at the CLC meetings, but there's a certain part of MB Power's portfolio that powers New Brunswick. And then there's a certain part of that portfolio that is for sale and for profit. And I think, you know, before we talk about replacing power, we should talk about conserving power and not using as much power, because I think there's a lot to do in that portfolio too.
Well, it's funny, there are these stories from other jurisdictions. Apparently, in Austin, Texas, this is a story I heard. In Austin, Texas, instead of building a new power plant, the power authority helped people insulate their homes, either at a low cost or free, and it saved so much energy they didn't have to build the plant. Kind of an interesting approach. Now, since I wasn't—
And what's interesting about— oh, I was going to say, what's interesting about that, Alan, is June 2019, June, there was the community open house meeting in well, I guess it's probably Milltown area, the Legion, and that actually was discussed. So community members brought that up. But the really interesting thing is that conservation of power is not within the mandate of NB Power. So that's not their business, right? It's somebody else's business. So it'd be nice if those two things were a little bit more, you know, designed holistically, but right now they're not, and that's not the mandate of MB Power. The MB Power mandate is something like providing power at the least cost.
Well, let's say, in another way of phrasing it, it's probably in everybody's mandate, but you know, maybe there are other
That's
mandates that take precedence. Now, I wasn't in those meetings. I would have enjoyed being in them. And for those who are watching this who weren't in them, what else was discussed that you think the community should know?
Well, one of the only major, I would call it any other major sort of concern, because really, I mean, I can't see that there's not, that everyone wouldn't be on board with taking out a piece of concrete. So I think the only other concerns are tied to perhaps community identity. There was the cotton mill at one point that lasted quite a long time within the community, and in fact was an economic center of the community. However, I guess the thing is that is part of our history. But there are a lot of there's future in front of us as well, I guess is what I want to say. And I think that by taking out a piece of concrete, no one is dismissing the history that's been there and what the community was built on. I think we're just entering a new chapter in community identity, and I guess to me that's pretty exciting. You know, I think that during this larger community conversation, it'd be nice to turn the tables a little bit, and, you know, instead of focusing on the damage to what some might perceive as a damage to, you know, the identity, is think about the future, think about our desires, think about the new chapter that we want to write, you know, and not focus on perceptions. You know, I think in this whole NB Power, Milltown, river restoration, I think one of the issues I've seen is that a lot of people think they're discussing the same issue, and it turns out that they're discussing their perception of the issue.
It's
So,
kind of like
you know,
like marriage.
exactly right. So, you know, one person says, oh, the Milltown project, and to them that means the building's gone, the dam is gone, the, you know, this and that is happening. And someone else is discussing the Milltown project, and they see everything exactly the same except for one little piece of concrete in the middle of the river, you know. So we're not all on the same page yet.
You know, it's interesting to me that you raised that kind of an issue, because first of all, people will mobilize to protest and block a park or an amenity that is a good thing for a community, because, you know, people sometimes resist change, and that's life. I think that was really well documented by Robert Caro in the book The Power Broker, about Robert Moses, the you know, huge builder of things in New York City. I've been going to St. Stephen now for 50 years, and St. Andrews, and went to UNB and worked for CHSJ, and I've, you know, covered a lot of stories like this, including the original hearings for Point Lacroix. And I think that I think you're right. I think communities do have personalities. They sometimes mourn the loss of something that nobody really uses or even wants, because, you know, the thing possessed is more valued. But how do you see this? I'm really intrigued about your views that this may be a catalyst to thinking about St. Stephen differently.
Well, I guess the one thing I know, there's been some different iterations of community planning, as there is in every community. And I think that somehow some of them lost their momentum. And I think that this may be something, because it is happening, and it's going to be happening for a number of years to get through the process, that we could really attach to. So attach our community identity and design in going forward. So I guess my question, and when people ask me, you know, why do you care about the dam and this and that, I've kind of, I don't. I care about the river, and I care about what the river could be. And I care about being able to dip my toes in the river and not have to go miles and miles and miles upriver where I feel comfortable, right? Like, what could this river be? Can you imagine a St. Stephen without the river? If you can't, it's got to hold some sort of value to you. So it's about people expressing that value. I would love to hear what kind of value that river holds to people, and then build on top of that. Instead of building on top of all these unknowns and assumptions, why don't we kind of find the ground? What is the river's value to us? Where do we think, what potential do we think it has? Unrealized potential, right? And it would kind of, in that, represent the unrealized potential in ourselves as well, right? And having a physical way to express it, which would be kind of neat.
I think that's really a stimulating way to think about it. And the things that came to my mind as you were speaking is number one, Richard Florida, the urban planner, who's pretty popular these days, has said that people like living near water and that young people like to go to those kinds of places. You know, St. Stephen, St. Andrews, the #1 tourist destination in North America, according to USA Today
Exactly.
readers. And I've sometimes quipped with Richard Florida that, well, you know, we have no choice. The rivers were our waterways for the first few hundred years after Europeans came here. You couldn't get around otherwise. So he's kind of discovered something that had to exist, but we'll leave that for another conversation. But the second thing I think about is that when I'm going to and from New Brunswick, I try to stop at Bangor for a couple of reasons, shopping, things like that. But in Brewer, there's a great seafood restaurant, and it is right on the river. And to have that experience that you're talking about, I don't put my toes in it, but to have that experience that you're talking about really makes for a very nice part of the trip. And that is a vision that I might have for St. Stephen as well.
Absolutely. There's so many different ideas that I guess that is the one thing I hope about this, is that this can be a catalyst for us to realize some of our potential. And like all it takes is people power, right? So, you know, like that's what change takes, is just us to decide we're doing something. So let's decide, like, you know, let's get on with this. You know, if you envision a floating library out on the St. Croix, the satellite library, right? Or if you know, like, not that I'm saying a whole bunch of built infrastructure is what we need, because I'm not saying that, but I am saying that the communities change. And, you know, there used to be over 100 wharves in the downtown St. Stephen area. That was something at one point. That was something before the Milltown Dam was there, right? And now, and then things change. Those are not part of our community anymore. There are remnants of them, but they're not part of our community anymore. And when the values of the community change, the environment changes to reflect that. So I just...
Two final thoughts. One, have I missed asking you a proper question that you wanted to answer? Is there something that you wish you could have said that I didn't let you because of my youthful exuberance in interrupting you? Any final thoughts?
No, it's just a reiteration of what I've been saying, is that that it's an important time, and I think we just need to attach some positive thinking to it, maybe revamp our perceptions. And the one other thing I guess I would say is, you know, so I mentioned the wharves and I mentioned the cotton mill, all these things in our past. But the other thing we have to realize is that this community, it's only been here 150 years. You know, we're just babies. There have been communities here for a lot longer than we have. And, you know, I think it's important to ask what they visualize too, for the broader community. And so that's a big part of things.
Well, you know, the final thing I wanted to say is that you've spent almost a lifetime on community issues, and there are many, many other things that we could have discussed, but this is what's happening right now. So thank you for letting me focus on that. And as an aspect of that, there have been studies, you know, the old phrase cocooning that I think Faith Popcorn invented was really based on community involvement studies of Italian government. And communities are better with activists like you. And some have the right idea and some have no ideas and some have wrong ideas. But it's that wonderful clash of ideas that makes a community vibrant. So, you know, good for you. All I can contribute is this interview from a distance, but happy to do what I can. But thank you very much for your work.
Well, thank you, Alan. Yeah, hopefully we'll spur some conversation. I have no doubt.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.